Hello, Newtown High School teachers. My name is MJ. I use they, them pronouns, and this is my presentation called What Are Your Pronouns? Focused on asking for your students' pronouns here at Newtown High School and asking for pronouns in daily life. So before I get started with the presentation, please click on the link down below or enter the link into a separate tab and take this survey before watching the rest of this presentation. It is important to getting my goal toward that I have a measured aspect, and this is the first component of a measured aspect that you will have to do in this presentation. So who am I? I'm a senior here at NHS. I'm graduating in June, which is kind of crazy to think about with COVID and everything. This is also my 12th year in Girl Scouts. When I graduate from high school, I will have had 13 years with the Girl Scouts of America Association. And I'm currently going for my Girl Scout Gold Award, which means that I'm going for the highest award that a Girl Scout can achieve. This award requires about 80 hours of work and is very labor intensive and obviously involves a measured component as you have to take surveys, and means that the Girl Scout has to identify a root cause for an issue. Mine is asking for pronouns, and then a solution. So my solution is presenting and encouraging teachers to ask for their students' pronouns. Now, this is a student-led project, which means that I've led this project since I started over a year ago, and I have been entirely self-directed with the wonderful help of my advisor and at certain times my family members. I'm also an officer for the NHS GSA. I've been a member of the GSA since I was a sophomore and an officer for my last 2 years. The GSA here is wonderful and an incredible resource to be able to have on any issues with the LGBTQ plus community and any suggestions. The officers that are in the club and also the advisors of the club are all wonderful, and it's a really great resource. I'm also a band member. The picture on the screen of me is me at our state championships back in 2019. I have been a band member since I was a freshman. I joined the marching band. So I finished my last season in November, and I am in the midst of my last season of jazz band and about to start my last season of winter percussion. So it's kind of crazy. And in a normal year, you would find me in Mr. Eckhart's office most of the time. But now this year, due to COVID, it's mostly just the band room and the auditorium. So some basic vocabulary before I get started. The first word is transgender, which is a gender that differs from the sex assigned at birth. So it's someone's gender, and it's when it differs from sex assigned at birth. Now, we have to remember that the term transgender is an umbrella term. On one side of this umbrella, there is people who are male to female transgender and female to male transgender, or FTM or MTF. This is the common side. On the other side, there are non-binary people, and that is someone whose gender is not specifically male or female. Under non-binary, like myself, I identify as non-binary, but people can identify as other things such as gender fluid, bi-gender, pangender, and it's really a really vast way of different labels and things that people feel comfortable identifying with. Now, the reason why this is such a big issue and why pronouns really need to be addressed are because of a lot of acceptance, and transgender people like myself use different pronouns. So another thing to know is gender neutral pronouns, and those are pronouns that are not he, him, or she, her. And some examples are they, them, or ze-zer. Now, ze-zer is an example of a neo-pronoun, and they're not the most common thing, but you will most likely encounter someone that uses them in your career anywhere. So it's really important to acknowledge that if a student asks you to use a certain pronoun, use a certain pronoun. And then the last definition is Gold Award, which is the Girl Scout equivalent of an Eagle Scout project. So it is the highest award that you can earn, and it brings with it a lot of work and a lot of hard work. And it makes it a really interesting process to trying to get this award. So why are gender neutral pronouns not common in our society? So historically, we have a binary society, which means that there is male and female. There's no real movement between that, and obviously now we have a lot of very strict gender stereotypes that have developed, and it's become a really big culture thing to just have this too. And because we only have two genders that are recognized and accepted, it means that he, him pronouns for males and she, her pronouns for females are default. You would look at me in a normal day and say, oh, your pronouns are she, her, when my pronouns aren't she, her. And it makes this really important difference in between the two. And that has also developed now into a lot of people believe that sex is equal to gender, which has been proven that it's not. It's gender is your identity and is what you feel, but your sex is the physical characteristics. Now, we also have to take into account that throughout history, there has been a lot of LGBTQ plus community harassment. People couldn't be out and comfortable, even in modern day society, but historically, there was a lot of reprieve and bad name against people who were necessarily LGBTQ plus, and you couldn't be out safely. And now in modern day, there are a lot of legal challenges and even laws that are specifically targeted at transgender people. In North Carolina, back in 2016, there was House Bill 2, which forced segregations of bathrooms, and it became a law, but was eventually fixed by the new governor. And then in Idaho, which is more recent, there's House Bill 500, which establishes biological differences in sexes and forces sports teams to be based on sex, which means that a transgender athlete, so to say a transgender athlete who is female to male, could not compete on the male sports team, would have to compete on a sports team that was marked as co-ed under this law. And it also means that trans students can't have the same access to sports just because simply their identity and the way that they're, people perceive them to be. And it really does segregate people. And it's different, obviously, from what we have in Connecticut. In Connecticut, we have, and under CAAC, there are sports teams that, you can have a transgender female student and that's on a female sports team and that's okay. But in some states, there are laws against that. And then also in Idaho, there's House Bill 509, which only allows people to change the gender on their birth certificate for up to 1 year after the child is born and to correct an error that was originally there, which means that trans people cannot change their birth certificate to reflect their true self and who they actually are. They're stuck with a marker that does not reflect them. So what can we do to change this? So the biggest thing is to respect people's pronouns. And respecting people's pronouns is not just something for the transgender community, but is for larger society in general. And it's really important to remember that everyone has pronouns and everyone has pronouns that they like and they use. And some people never consider or changing their pronouns, but some people do. So how do we do this? You can ask for your students' pronouns and then give your pronouns at the start of class. When starting class, when getting to first know your students, make sure that they understand that it's a comfortable space where you can ask for them and you'll respect that. And you can also give yours and let your students make sure that they're using your pronouns correctly. And then use pronouns when referencing the student that in question. It's important to make sure that student feels respected and make sure that they're included into the school community. And also you want to encourage use of pronouns and use of gender neutral pronouns, like not gendering examples that may be used on math homeworks or English papers. You want to make sure that you have those gender neutral examples to make sure that all students can feel accepted. And then the biggest thing is to talk to students if an issue arises and ask what they're comfortable with. Communication is key in these aspects, and it's really important to the overall inclusion and support of the entire transgender community. It's really critical to making sure that students are comfortable and students feel accepted. So in the packet provided, you'll find some different situations that I've created to reflect situations that may come up in your careers and your paths with students. Situation number 1, you have a student approach you about their name and pronouns. Follow the instructions on the worksheet and answer the question, what should you do? You can pause here and complete the situation before moving on to the next one. Situation number 2, you are doing a parent-teacher conference and a student requested that you use different pronouns and a different name for what they use in class. This is a really great example of trying to keep students safe and trying to respect students that may not be out in all aspects of life. So follow the instructions on the worksheet provided and write a short reflection about what you may do in this situation. You can pause here and then continue the video. So how exactly do you go about asking for pronouns at the start of a class? Some ideas, you can use a traditional paper questionnaire. Obviously, in COVID times, it's a little difficult because not all students are in person all the time, but a questionnaire in general is a really great way to get to know your students just as a very basis. You can also use a Google form, which I know most of my teachers have transitioned to using just because of COVID, and it's a way to get to know your students in just same aspects of what you may normally have. You can also include a pronoun spot on worksheets, which I'll talk about a little bit later when I get there to that slide, as it is a little bit more complex and may not make as much sense to people, but is still really important. You can also tell your students to email you about their pronouns and their name, but there are complications. There are some students, like myself, that are not going to have enough courage and confidence to speak up and say, no, I would like to go by this name and this pronoun. And that's perfectly fine for every student, and it's different. And so you have to understand that that's not the best way to go about things. It's more about proactively asking your students and proactively remembering that not all students are brave enough to talk about this, and that it's, sometimes better to just learn this about their students. You can also use gender neutral examples and material, and this is something you can continue to do year round. This isn't something that you can reserve just for the start of the year. So some really great examples that I've seen, and there's a little chart off to the side where instead of saying girls and boys, you can say students. You could also just say, pupils, and it's a really great way to kind of ungender language. And this personally is something that I'm working on, and it's a kind of like a instilled habit, but it's a really great way to change and be more inclusive in your language just in general. Instead of saying mom and dad or something like that, you can say parents or grown-ups or adults, and it's kind of a way to recognize that not everyone at all ages is the same. And you can also say, instead of saying husband, wife, girlfriend, boyfriend, you can say a partner or a spouse. So, a student may say, oh, my boyfriend, or you could have an example in a worksheet where it's like, oh, someone's partner instead of someone's boyfriend. And it kind of opens up and makes you remember that not everyone is, straight, and not everyone is, identifies as the sex they're born as. So this is an example of the Google form. You can also find this on the worksheets in the full form. This is just the first 3 questions. So as normal, it's the start of class questionnaire, basic questions like what is your name, what name would you like to be called in class, and what pronouns do you use, and then some examples of what students can answer. And most students I found really don't have a question about this. For me, I would answer, oh, my name is Meredith Taylor. I would like to be called MJ, and I use they, them pronouns. It's very straightforward and very simple and a very good way to go about it, and also very convenient, especially given COVID and all the restrictions and whatnot that we face and not being in person. The next is the pronoun spot on a worksheet. Now, this is a really great way to keep on track with your students as the year goes on, and keep up track of your students, and things may change, and a student may not feel comfortable approaching a teacher that they have all year about their change in pronouns. And this is just a way to reinforce that idea that this is a question that I want you to answer, but also just a question that makes it regular to ask about what are your pronouns, where a student's just like automatically going to think like, okay, these are my pronouns, this is okay, this is normal. And I know a lot of colleges now ask for pronouns, and it's really kind of an important thing to include. So this is just included on a regular worksheet. You can find this on the worksheet that you work along with this presentation, and it's a really great way to just keep up track and keep in contact with your students. The last one is a paper questionnaire, which, given COVID and regulations, I understand is difficult to do in these days, but it has a lot of the same questions as the Google form, as your name and the nickname you want to be called in class, your pronouns that the student can answer, may the student use those pronouns, may the teacher use the pronouns in front of the class, pronouns if you need to contact home, pronouns in front of other teachers, and if the student would like to follow up with you in private about their pronouns. And it's a really great way to just introduce our questions, but also get specificity in certain situations where it may not be safe for a student to necessarily be out to everybody. And then it follows up with generic questions that I think I've seen a million times. Being a student, what's something you're looking forward to this year? What's something you're concerned about? 3 things about you that I should know, or something that you struggle with. Like, it's very normal questions, and just kind of throws it on, makes it a very regular thing to see. There are, of course, a few things to remember with asking for pronouns. And the biggest things are the what not to do. You really do not want to make the colleague or student stick out in any way for their identity and for their pronouns and for their name. It's really uncomfortable when that happens for trans students and students in general. They don't want to be called out for something. And 2, it's one of those things where you just want to make sure that everyone feels comfortable with what's going on. You also don't want to ignore their name and pronouns, and I'll get into specificity here at Newtown a little bit later, but it's really important to use their name and their pronouns. And something to note now is a lot of times will hear preferred name and preferred pronouns. It's not their preferred name or their preferred pronouns, it's their name and pronouns. And that is really kind of an example of creating a more accepting environment for transgender students and for all students in general, that your name is your name and your pronouns are your pronouns. There's no difference in that. And you also really don't want to tell everyone about it. You don't want to go and tell all your colleagues about it, going home and tell that. Like, you can obviously, there are certain limitations, but it's about respecting the student's privacy as well, and respecting the fact that the student felt comfortable enough with you to tell you, hey, these are my pronouns, this is my name, and leave it at that. You also really don't want to overemphasize correcting yourself, which I understand can be hard to remember. If you misgender a student or even a colleague or someone in your life, move on. Correct yourself and move on. It's really not that big of a deal. Don't go, oh my gosh, I'm so sorry. Oh my gosh. Move on. It's makes it more comfortable for them and then also better in the long term. Just remember that mistake and learn from it. And two, if you don't express having an issue with using their name and pronouns, this seems like something that is so routine, but we see in society that it may not be the most accepted thing in certain situations. So it's that student's name and pronouns. It's as normal as bread and butter. We use pronouns and names on a daily basis, and it's just something that you may have to learn in a little bit extra way and is maybe a little bit different from what you've had to handle in the past. So specifically here in Newtown, we have Board of Ed Policy 5145.53, and this is a policy specifically covering transgender students. You can find the entire policy listed. You can find the entire policy out in your worksheet, and that goes through definitions that they use and all that, and all the different areas where this may be acceptable. But I specifically have the section on names and pronouns. So it says, a student has the right to be addressed by a name and pronoun that corresponds to the student's gender identity or expression if so requested. A court-ordered name change or gender change is not required, and the student need not change his or her official records. Now, really great learning opportunity. It should realistically say their official records and use gender-neutral language as you're talking about all students, not specifically just transgender, typically transgender female to male or male to female students. You're talking about all students. And so in my case, personally, I use MJ, and I would like to use they, them pronouns. And I don't have any of the things, name or gender change, but it does help to affirm my gender identity and my gender expression, and it makes me more comfortable at school to use that. And it is really good way to make your students feel accepted and comfortable in the community. And in Newtown, it is thankfully a right of the students to have this and to feel comfortable in our school community where they may feel uncomfortable. And so it's really important to remember and take this into account. Now, in general, the biggest thing to remember is do not out someone who is not out. It can be uncomfortable and create a lot of uncomfortable situations. It can also create unsafe situations. Not every student has the liberty of having an accepting family. We live in a very divided country, and it makes it hard when people have different beliefs. And so, there are certain people, even in my life, that I will most likely not be out to until I move out of my house. And it's just the reality of certain students. So in general, for students, use the pronouns that they request in the situations that they request. And it really, helps to create a more accepting environment. And even for regular students who aren't trans, it's still really great to encourage that. You also want to make sure that you can keep the conversation open and have, a kind of a trusting relationship with them. That's really important, and I think is a really good foundation to being a teacher. And you also want to let them know that they can come to you. Remember, communication is key in these situations, and it's really important to have that link in between students and teachers. For your colleagues, respect their pronouns. Obviously, it may seem pretty straightforward that a certain colleague uses these pronouns, a certain colleague uses these pronouns, but ask and remember to respect them and to use them, and let them know if they can come to you with issues. Like if they have questions, talk about it, use collaboration. It's really great, at least from a student perspective, to see teachers collaborating on questions that may come up and talking about them with each other, because it shows that there is that collaborative environment that you want to model. And also remember to report any harassment that may be happening at any level, even if it's a just simple student getting bullied for their identity. It's important to report that and try and get that student to feel more comfortable and more accepted in their environment. And then also encourage others to learn about this, and if possible, attend training. This is really great training, and this is, well, I wouldn't necessarily consider this professional training, but it is really great to learn about asking for this, learn about the issues and the ways to do it and go about this that could help to make your classroom and your teaching more accepting. And training in general can be a really great thing with learning how to handle certain issues. Now, in general daily life, ask someone about their pronouns if you don't know. Obviously, some people never think that, their pronouns or anything. They don't necessarily consider that, pronouns can be different, or, and it's not just something that you would have in daily society, but it's important to ask if you don't know. And you don't want to keep misgendering someone just because you don't want to ask their pronouns. It's something that really should be routine within language. And you also want to keep up with people's changes, with changes of people's pronouns or names in their life, and make sure that they're feeling accepted and respected in every single day. And then try to use their pronouns whenever it's safe. And it's a really big deal to, try to make sure that they're feeling safe and respected around you and around other people. And it's a really great way to make sure that you are, being a good ally and being a good teacher, even teacher, friend, colleague, whatever. And also use gender inclusive language. You may notice that in my language, I use, they, them a lot. And so it's important to include that not everyone is a she and not everyone's a he. Some people are in the middle, and you want to respect everyone and you want to include everyone. So using gender inclusive language can be really important, especially speaking in terms of the LGBTQ plus community and the very wide amount of diversity you can face. You also, if possible, stand up against other people misgendering others. If you overhear students using the wrong name or pronouns for a student, and you think that it's a good time to correct them. Don't let them keep thinking that it's this way just because that student necessarily hasn't been too vocal in the class. I know for me, with my name, a lot of my peers know me as Meredith, and a lot of times my teachers call me MJ. My peers may not necessarily call me Meredith, but for me, that's something I'm okay, and that's something you have to talk about the individual person with. But, I just know that I'm done with high school in June, and it's not really one of those big things in my mind. So, but just try and correct that and make sure that people feel accepted and welcome and respected in everyday situations. So recently I pulled the GSA and got some suggestions from them. The first one, a really big one right at the start, include your pronouns on the first day of school in your introduction. So, hi, I'm blank, my pronouns are blank. So I would say, hi, I'm MJ, my pronouns are they, them. And it's a really simple way to introduce yourself to students and very routine, but just throws in pronouns and makes it more normalized. One of the other pieces of recommendation was that the student would like that if a teacher sent out a Google form or even a questionnaire in non-COVID times with what pronouns are okay for class, home, etc., acknowledging that there are different situations where it may be safe or not. And then also they agreed with people, saying not to make it a big thing and just ask it like it's a normal getting to know you question. Normalize that this question is part of society and that there are people who may be different from others and respect that diversity. And then also remember that you shouldn't make a big deal of accidentally misgendering someone. Correct yourself and move on. Don't be like, oh my gosh, but just keep moving on. And these are really great feedbacks from students and teachers here in high school that are applicable for a lot of daily life, but even here in school, it's really important to remember that, moving on and being respectful of everyone is really important. The biggest thing to remember is to respect people's pronouns and where you have been asked to use them. It matters, and when it happens, it feels great for transgender people. And like I said, not all people really acknowledge it, but it still feels great when it happens, and it really does help to create more inclusion within the community. So now that we've reached the end of my presentation, please fill out the form listed below, or you can enter the link on screen into a separate tab and fill out the form. Now that I've reached the end of my presentation, this is the second aspect of my measurement component. Thank you so much for watching this presentation and getting to this point. So thank you again. It means a lot for me to be able to do these presentations finally. If you have any questions, you can find me at whatareyouropronouns@gmail.com. You can email me with any lasting questions. And you can also follow my journey for the last couple months with my Gold Award. What are your pronouns underscore on Insta? What are your underscore pronouns on Instagram? Obviously, it's a really great way to kind of like get questions. And then I really look forward to getting to meet with all of you in our live Q&As that will hopefully happen soon. And thank you so much for watching. I really hope you enjoyed the presentation.